Okay, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to stand amongst you once again. Today's actually Eid al-Adha, celebrating the holiest day of the year for Muslims. Though we're not in a celebrating mood, these days remind us to have faith in the victory that is coming for those who face oppression and for those who fight for them. Today's also Father's Day here in the U.S., a day to honor all of the protective strength and all of the nurturing care that makes men into fathers, like the man whose baby got beheaded in Rafah a few weeks ago. Shame. In total, he lost his wife and 3 of his 5 children in that massacre. There have already been multiple massacres in Palestine since then, with the IOF most recently hiding in humanitarian aid trucks like cowards and then bombing and raiding family homes and shooting the children inside. When we talk about the horrors of genocide, we often cite the casualties in terms of women and children, but we leave out the men. Why? Because it is through the dehumanization and villainization of men that the state has been able to justify this genocide in the first place.
That's right.
How else could the so-called civilized democratic Western world dare refer to the recent slaughter of almost 300 Palestinian civilians in Nusayrat refugee camp as a successful operation? Any Palestinian man killed is automatically assumed to be a terrorist. This assumption ignores the fact that women also make up the Palestinian resistance, and it implies that bravely defending oneself and one's family in a genocide disqualifies them from the status of perfect victims. Victims, according to the colonizer, should be helpless and disempowered, pregnant women facing famine, and orphans in bare feet missing a limb or two. And their husbands and brothers aren't considered in the context of these war crimes as people who are also suffering, but rather as people whose threatening existence somehow makes these horrors necessary. Men of color and Muslim men have long been accustomed to this treatment from the West, understanding that their lives don't matter in the public eye, nor according to the rule of law. Back when the dystopian horrors known as drones were a revolutionary new technology, the U.S. military would use them to target men in Afghanistan who were, quote, wearing the Taliban uniform. The Taliban don't have a uniform. The Americans' orders were to shoot any man in Afghani clothing. Afghani women, meanwhile, were expected to be grateful to the West for saving them by murdering their fathers, brothers, husbands, and sons. This mentality has been carefully implanted in the public consciousness, as racialized, Islamophobic stereotypes of violent bearded men in turbans have been served up by every institution from the mainstream media to Hollywood. Here in the United States, a land built on the oppression of indigenous and black people, black men have similarly been typecast as threats to society rather than part of that society, and considered dangerous even as they face the greatest dangers and are killed by IDF-trained police without retribution. Back in the 80s, black journalist Brent Staples wrote about the effort he has to put into not scaring people when he's out for an evening stroll. How for his own safety, he's learned to, quote, whistle melodies from Beethoven and Vivaldi. How he has to wear suits instead of jeans to put cops at ease, and reassure white women who clutch their purses at the sight of him. The irony is obvious. He's the one in danger precisely because he's perceived as dangerous. Fear is a powerful political tool, and teaching white people to fear men of color and to see women of color as victims can make everything Western governments have to do to stay in power seem justified and protective rather than self-serving. Of course, the colonizer's long arm is as prominent in Africa as it is in the Middle East and the U.S. In Sudan, the Arab paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces, with the funding of the United Arab Emirates, has been ethnically cleansing the land by slaughtering, raping, and displacing the black Masalit people. Even the survivors who flee to the Egyptian border are dying of heat stroke at this very moment because Egypt won't let them in. Shame! Shame! The Emirates, of course, has pioneered normalizing diplomatic relations with Israel because of their shared value of genocide as a means to wealth. Meanwhile, Israel has been training the Congolese military. Just take a moment to think about how strange that is and what implications it has. And the president of Congo Kinshasa traveled to the U.S. for an APAC conference, while his people suffer their own ongoing genocide and mass displacement. These massive-scale atrocities and many others around the globe have been easier for oppressors to carry out without backlash since October, as Israel's boundless depravity holds the world's attention. And the Western Empire continues to justify it all by presenting men of color as barbaric. But colonized men continue to disprove Western narratives about them, like Khalid Nabhan, the Palestinian grandfather who went viral as he kissed the tiny corpse of his martyred granddaughter Reem, calling her the soul of his soul. And I want to pause here because we often talk about how inspiring it is to witness the resilience of the Palestinian people, but sometimes there's a risk of dehumanizing the suffering by superhumanizing them for their ability to bear atrocities, meaning the evils they face are so horrific that our brains seek desperately to rationalize them, to retain our ability to make sense of the world. Sometimes we might think Palestinians are built different. They're used to living this way. That's not true. They're as vulnerable as any of us. They might show more patience, but they experience hunger and loss and violence in the same way any of us would, and that's why it hurts so much. When I see the daily death tolls in numbers that my brain can't comprehend, I feel gutted because I know it could have been any of us living there instead of here. And I know they love the people they clutch in body bags with the same intensity of love that I feel for my family. In these circumstances, the most honorable course of action is to fight oppression and the societies that find it acceptable, until we stop hearing about colonized terrorists and white saviors. At this point, Palestine's freedom is inevitable, and with it, God willing, we are witnessing the fall of Western imperialism. Woo!